The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Whitting.
If NDEs are a gift, then how does that gift manifest itself in our lives? What insights, changes, or skills do NDE survivors receive? And how diverse or extreme might those gifts be? Welcome to this week's edition of NDE Radio, brought to you by IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Whitting. Once a person who has had an NDE begins to assimilate what has happened to them, what they have learned about themselves and the nature of reality, they sometimes also discover that they have gained certain talents, insights, or powers they didn't have before. No more fear of death, a desire to help others, and perhaps some psychic gifts can be just some of the results of having an NDE. One person who played the harp beautifully at one of our IANS conferences gained his musical skill, he told us, from an NDE in which he was promised this musical ability, often attributed to the angels. Our guest today has quite an unusual ability, related in some way to her 3 near-death experiences. She refers to it as PK, an abbreviation of the term psychokinesis. Now, Wikipedia tells us that the word psychokinesis is from the Greek language psyche, meaning mind, soul, spirit, heart, or breath, and kinesis, meaning motion or movement. And telekinesis is also a word from the Greek that means distant movement. The term telekinesis was coined in 1890 by a Russian psychical researcher, Alexander Aksionov. The term psychokinesis was coined in 1914 by American author-publisher Henry Holt in his book On the Cosmic Relations, and adopted by his friend American parapsychological Art J.B. Rhine in 1934 in connection with experiments to determine if a person could influence the outcome of falling dice. Both concepts have been described by other terms, such as remote influencing, distance influencing, remote mental influence, mind over matter, and so forth. Originally, telekinesis was coined to refer to the movement of objects thought to be caused by ghosts of deceased persons or mischievous spirits, angels, demons, or other supernatural forces. Later, the term began to refer to an ability allegedly possessed by living people. It was speculated that certain people could cause movement without any connection to a spiritualist setting, such as in a darkened seance room, and psychokinesis was added to the lexicon. Eventually, psychokinesis became the term preferred by the parapsychological community. Popular usage favors the word telekinesis to describe the paranormal movement of objects, perhaps due to the word's resemblance to other terms such as telepathy and teleportation. Some early researchers who studied psychokinesis speculated that within the human body, an unidentified fluid termed the psychode, or psychic force, or ectanic force, existed and was capable of being released to influence matter. Robert Schrock has written, "I do believe that some psychokinesis is real," referring to the evidence for micro-psychokinesis obtained by the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research, that's PAIR is the acronym for that, experiments and similar studies and some reports of macro PK observed in poltergeist cases. He reports once seeing a book jump off a shelf while in a room where a female psychokinesis agent was also present. Then Michael Crichton described what he termed a successful experience with psychokinesis as a spoon-bending party in his 1988 book, Travels. Dean Radin also reported that he, like Michael Crichton, was able to bend the bowl of a spoon over with unexplained ease of force with witnesses present at a different informal PK experiment gathering. And some of you who may have seen the movie The Matrix may remember that Neo comments on a child bending a spoon, and the child reminds him that the secret is there is no spoon. My interview with our guest today, Cheryl Lee, was recorded at the Washington, D.C. IANS conference in August of last year. Because of its length, we will continue our conversation on next week's show as well. But tell us about your 3 near-death experiences.
Okay, well, my first one happened when I was very, very young. I was just a toddler. I was a bit of a Houdini as a child. I seemed to be able to unlock every door that my parents had put in my way to keep me out of trouble. And on this particular day, I opened a door to the basement while playing with the family dog, who probably weighed twice what I did at that age. And the 2 of us took a tumble down the stairway, and I took a header and cracked my skull open right here. What I remember after hitting the bottom step was this lady picking me up, and I didn't know who she was, or and at the time I wasn't even really worried about who she was, because I just felt really, really cared for and loved and happy, and everything was good, and there was like absolutely no pain, and it was really it was like this dark, pretty light. Like it was almost like a really, really dark purpley blue light. And it was kind of sparkly and pretty. And at the time it was okay for a little bit, but then being a little kid, it kind of occurred to me, I really want my dad. and that's I really, really want dad now. Like, you're a nice lady, but I want my dad. And then the next thing I kind of remember is, I guess I came out of it, and my dad was holding me. And that was kind of the end of that experience. But I kept seeing that lady throughout my childhood, and I didn't know who she was because there was no pictures of her in my house. And it turned out that my grandmother on my mom's side had passed away just before I was born, and my middle name is actually named after her. And there were no pictures of her because my grandfather was still going through a terrible grieving process. He was twice my grandmother's age when they were married, and he had no expectations that he would outlive her. And she died very suddenly, very tragically, and he almost didn't survive it. And so I'd never seen her, and yet as a child, she was like pretty much my first imaginary friend in a way. This lady that picked me up and made me feel safe and comforted when I took a header down the basement stairway and hurt myself. And and that was kind of an interesting thing that went along with it. Was my grandfather was actually terminally ill when I was little, diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he got cured.
Really?
And I apparently after I was born, he spent a lot of time with me. Mm-hmm. And I think I actually used like words that I'd heard from her, and she spoke German. No one else in the family spoke German. My grandparents all spoke different first languages. And so I would use words that I'd heard her say, and he would recognize that. So he spent a lot of time with me. Like, he looked after me. He was retired, and my mom worked. So he used to babysit me quite a bit when I was very little. And we spent a lot of time together, and I would use these words. And whatever it was, like whether it was just the fact that he enjoyed spending time with his first granddaughter, or whether it was because he kind of knew that there was 3 of us that were hanging out together rather than just the 2 of us, he got better, and he lived quite a few more years after that.
That's great.
Yeah, and he was actually in a medical study because he had this complete remission from terminal cancer.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Do you think he realized that? Did you talk to him about your imaginary friend at all?
I probably did. I mean, I was a toddler. I was really little when he, he used to look after me before I was old enough to go full time in school. Like, I had kindergarten until the mornings, and he'd look after me in the afternoons.
Do you suppose that he had an idea that your imaginary friend was his?
I think so. Yeah,
nice.
I kind of think so. Like I said, because I would use phrases that because they were German ones, that nobody else in the family would have used those words.
Now, you got some gifts. Did they start with your first NDE?
I think some of them certainly did. I mean, my parents both have stories of me telling them things that turned out to be true. My dad's favorite Christmas story is, I guess I was about 6 or 7, and my dad had told my older brothers that the Santa Claus topic was off limits. Do not tell her that there is no Santa Claus, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That Santa Claus is real, and you better not ruin Christmas for your youngest sister here. And that was kind of the rule. And I was, and I was kind of getting to the point where my oldest brother was 5 years older, and he really, he was jaded and worldly, and he didn't really believe in that stuff. But he was trying his best to keep his mouth shut about that. And of course of course there's a Santa Claus, and this is what I'm going to get. And I described this tea set, and it was porcelain tea set that had blue flowers on it. And apparently I described this tea set in loving detail. And I'd written a note to Santa with my mom's help describing that this is like the one thing I really wanted for Christmas. And it was just, that was it. And I knew that I was going to get it. Like, I was absolutely convinced. My mom and dad looked everywhere for this tea set. They could not find it. All they wanted to do was get me that tea set, and they could not find it anywhere. And they didn't think the tea set existed. They just, it was about 2 weeks before Christmas, and they'd given up. And my dad had an office Christmas party. Mm-hmm. And at the office Christmas party, there was Santa there, and of course it was arranged that Santa would give each little kid a present. Well, I was absolutely convinced that Santa was going to give me my tea set, and my parents were just mortified that I was not going to get the tea set, because they had no idea what the presents were going to be at this. And I guess they had tried to explain to me that, well, he might not give it to you now, but it's still a couple weeks wait till it's really Christmas, so don't pin your hopes in this. And I was absolutely convinced I was getting my tea set, and that's what I got. So on Santa's knee, and it had the blue flowers on porcelain that I had described. And my dad said that for years after that, no one, the most skeptical child in the neighborhood, could not convince me that Santa was not real. And then my dad said that even he started to wonder if Santa was real.
As opposed to premonition and clairvoyance.
Well, of course, because nobody would know that. And
right.
I think my mother's favorite story was when I was about 5 years old. I really wanted drum lessons. I wanted to play drums. I was going to play drums. That was the only instrument I was interested in. And my mom wanted me to play piano first. And I don't really blame her. A 5-year-old playing drums is not...
not what the neighbors want to hear.
No, not what every parent wants. And particularly, a little girl playing drums. Nowadays it's more accepted, but back then it was unusual. And so my mom tried to talk me into piano. And I looked her in the eye, apparently, and said, I'm never going to make a living playing piano, but I will make a living as a drummer someday, so can't we just forego all this and let me play drums? And my mom, thought, okay, this is silly. She is not going to make a living as a professional drummer someday. And my mom brought up this story when I was 19 years old and playing drum as a professional drummer in a military band and going on tour with bands. And actually that was how I paid for all of my university education, was by playing drums.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, what about moving things? Did that happen after the first?
That happened after the second.
Okay. Well, tell us about your second NDE.
I don't know how much, today at this conference already, people have kind of, as soon as I say I had a negative one, they change the subject.
Oh, I think negative ones are very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've never really gone through all of it. I probably won't get through all of it, but I had my appendix burst when I was 10 years old. Right. And my poor parents were... my parents both worked, and it was a Monday morning. I woke up with a tummy ache. I had been absolutely fine the day before. And of course my brothers were both saying, she's faking it. She doesn't want to go to school today. And everyone was kind of like, yeah, this is kind of a mysterious stomach ache that just shows up half an hour before it's time to leave for school. Interesting. and so, I think that there was some doubt as to whether or not it was anything more than I don't really feel like going to school today. Yeah. But I got sicker and sicker, and in the end my parents did take me to the doctors. Mm-hmm. And from the doctor's office I was basically sent in an ambulance straight to the hospital because my appendix was in the process of bursting. And what I remember of that one was I remember leaving my body. And I remember when I was in my body, everything was very nightmarish already. And I guess when you've got that kind of poison going through your system, it does cause kind of hallucinations, and everything seemed monstrous and scary to me anyway. And I actually felt better when I was outside of my body. Like, that part was okay. But instead of, at the time, I remember there were people there, well, people like lights, people, like...
spirits, entities?
Yes, spirits, entities that wanted me to go a certain way. And I don't know, I guess at 10 years old I was already, that preteen miserable quality people, stage people go through. And I was like, no, I'm going to find Mom and Dad, And I found Mom and Dad arguing in the waiting room, and they were having a terrible argument. And I'd never seen them have an argument like that when I was, growing up, because they just didn't do that. Mm-hmm. And, and of course they were blaming each other for not getting me to the hospital sooner, and what if I die, and what, I mean, it was a really just gut-wrenching thing to see my parents having this kind of dispute and not knowing what was going to happen to me. And it was really, I think it was too adult for me to see.
Yes.
And it kind of made me feel like everything was on the line, and it was up to me to fix it. And I remember trying to communicate with them, and they couldn't see me, and that was really upsetting when you're a little kid and your parents aren't acknowledging you when you're trying to get their attention, and they couldn't figure out that I was there. And then things just kind of got more and more nightmarish from there, and I'm not going to get into all the details because some of it I'm just not up to talking about.
Did you travel away from that scene into some other place?
Kind of wandered around. I remember the spirit people wanted me to go to a certain place, and I was sure that if I went there that I wasn't coming back. And I seemed to have all this knowledge about what would happen if I didn't come back and what would happen if I did come back. And I was very, very sure that my parents would get divorced if I did not come back, that their marriage was not going to survive the death of their youngest child.
So you had a premonition of alternative lives that they would have lived if, depending on your decision.
And I remember thinking about how it was going to affect my brothers, and how it was going to affect my dad dying alone and lonely and heartbroken. And it was just...
Now, were these fears, or were these actual visions that you were having?
Actual, I knew.
You knew.
I knew. And the thing is, I saw other things that came true. Like, for many years, I kind of thought, okay, that was just a really bad nightmare. Because I didn't even know it was considered an NDE until recently. Because I didn't know there was such a thing as a distressing NDE. And I probably would have dismissed it as a nightmare, except that I saw other things that have, there have been milestones throughout my life that have come true, that I remember seeing on that timeline, including the car accident that led to my third NDE. Right before my third NDE, and I could feel it coming, I got all my paperwork in order. I cleaned my house. I phoned my mom and told her I loved her. I did everything just in case I didn't come back from that one. So because I started to clue in that, all those things that I remember having, premonitions about, seemed to be happening. But one of my premonitions was that if I did come back, that my parents would stay together. Now, they just celebrated their 55th wedding anniversary. So they're still together, and they're still doing good. Yeah.
I wouldn't call that a bad NDE. I think that was you had a vision of the future, which obviously contained good and bad things. But
there were other parts of the NDE, there's the premonition part, but there was also that feeling of being really, really lost, because I wasn't going to go with the spirit guides, and I was being a bad kid, I guess is how I kind of felt that, there was just a lot of things where I thought, part of it was I actually felt a little bit guilty because part of me kind of wanted to go with them,
Did you have the feeling these were good spirit guides? Or
some of them were ones I had seen, including my grandma.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, I knew they were, but I knew I was just not going there. and I got lost, and I saw things that were nightmarish and scary. So there was also this idea that I saw a lot of very adult things, too, which were nightmarish and scary to me when I was 10 years old. I saw the end of my first marriage, and I mean, after that NDE, I remember telling people, I'm not getting married, I'm not getting married, I'm not getting married. And, when you're 10 years old and you say, I'm not ever going to get married, they just say, yeah, wait till you're 12. Wait till you're 20, wait till you're 24. Don't tell us this when you're 10. But, I mean, I went through, an I'm not going to get married stage. And even, I mean, when I did meet my first husband, he spent 5 years asking me to get married at least a couple times a year before I relented. And it was still a bad idea. And even in my current marriage, my poor husband went through 5 years of talking me into it.
So those were vivid images that you had when you were having your NDE.
Yeah.
Okay, so after that NDE, tell us about the additional gifts that you got.
Well, I don't know if I'd call it a gift, but one of the things that occurred to me when I was 11, which was a year after, my appendix what's left of it was taken out, was that a school teacher hit me in class. And I wasn't doing anything bad. I had actually been doing what I was told to do by the school guidance counselor because they didn't want to skip me ahead into another grade because I was already the youngest in my class. I was already the smallest in my class, and there were concerns that I wasn't physically and emotionally mature enough to be skipped ahead into another grade. So what they had told me to do when I was bored and going a little bit nuts in school was to take out a sketchbook and draw pictures, and that would be okay, and that nobody would punish me for that. And this teacher hit me in the face for doing that. Yeah. And I mean, I felt really completely betrayed by this woman. And a book flew across the classroom and hit her. And in front of a room full of 10-year-olds, or 11-year-olds, I guess. And of course, after that, all the adults would lie about it. I saw it, my classmates saw it, and suddenly all the adults were rewriting history and pretending that, I had done something really, really bad, but nobody would actually say what it was. The school actually wanted me to be put on antipsychotics and whatever else they could put me on to try and shut it down.
They accused you of throwing the book?
That was one of the stories. I mean, it was really, some of the stories really didn't make sense. I mean, that was one of the things that I found very difficult was how do the adults believe that I had time to get up, walk across the room, pick up a book, throw it at her, and then run back into my desk before she, and sit there
What did your classmates say about it? Did they realize that wasn't the case?
People stayed away from me. A lot of my classmates, some of them just kind of...
Because they knew that something had happened they couldn't explain?
They knew something had happened, and I think people kind of... When things like that happen, people forget, or they rationalize it away, or they just do whatever they have to do internally to not have to deal with it. And a lot of people basically just stayed away from me. It was really tough because up until that point in school, I had been a fairly popular little girl and had lots of friends, and I liked going to school. Like, school was fun. I learned things. It was interesting. But sometimes I found it overwhelming. Like, I mean, even at that age, I had difficulty being around crowded, noisy places and a lot of people. And you couldn't get them to give you a break, and just go sit in the library for an hour until you're okay with it. I mean, they wouldn't give me that kind of a kindness, and they wouldn't even let me sit there quietly with my sketchbook at that point, So yeah, it was tough because people just stayed away from me, and I was taken out of the class once a week to go to the guidance counselors, who gave me idiotic tests. I mean, they tested me for everything, and they couldn't find anything wrong with me. You know, I didn't have any learning disabilities. I wasn't disabled in any way. They just went through it all, and they couldn't find anything. And I mean, for years, I actually went for testing once a week through about 3 years. And they couldn't find anything.
All based on this book, Flying Across the Room.
Well, and the teacher's nervous breakdown.
Oh. Okay. Now, what other occasions have occurred since where things have moved without your actually physically doing the moving?
Oh, well, I mean, there's been quite a few. Now, I'm not always sure if it's me or not. The night I had one living grandmother at that point, and she passed away when I was about 24. And the night she passed away, all of the electronics in the house came on by themselves. I was married to my first husband at the time, and he went around unplugging everything, and they still came on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, was this after your third NDE?
No, it was actually prior to my third NDE, but it was the night my grandmother had passed away, and she had actually said goodbye to me. When I saw her for the last time, she said, "This is the last time." I mean, she absolutely knew when she was going to die. It was like she planned it.
And she wasn't in the same house.
No.
So it was your.
Yeah, I didn't know when and I mean, everyone kind of said, "Oh no, she's just saying that, you can't know that you're going to die when you're going to die," but she apparently did. And the night she passed away, around the time she passed away, it was in the middle of the night, and that's when everything. And I remember dreaming about her that night. And the dreams were really peaceful, and she just said, I know you're not going to be happy about this, and I'm sorry, I'm sorry, this is how it, it's my time, and you're just going to have to accept this, and it's okay, and we can still communicate, and it's all right. And I'm not sure whether the things moving around the house was me being kind of upset and having a little psychic tantrum, or whether that was just all the energy because, I mean, when I dreamt about her, I mean, it was just this big ball of energy. Yeah. I mean, it was like a force of nature. My grandmother was like a force of nature. I mean, she was a very independent woman. I mean, at a time when women didn't work and have careers, she was a professional musician. When she retired from doing that, her and my grandfather ran a family business together. I mean, so she'd always worked and done her own thing. It was a free spirit. So she was like this force of nature. When she passed away, it was just...
Was she a role model for you?
I think she understood my experiences even when I was really little and didn't. A lot of the things that she suggested that I could do to help me cope, like actually sitting down and just drawing with a sketchbook and playing music. And I mean, she was a very talented musician herself. We used to play together a lot when I was little. But yeah, I mean, she had an understanding of and being out in nature and having quiet time and turning off the TV. I mean, I spent my summers with my grandparents when I was little, and there was no TV for the summer, which I think a lot of people just couldn't do nowadays. But I grew up with that was okay. You could just turn off that stuff and go outside and sit under a tree and read a book or do a puzzle or something.
Thanks to Cheryl Lee for sharing her story with us. We will continue the interview on next Monday's show. To learn more about the International Association for Near-Death Studies, check out our website at iands.org. For NDE Radio, this is Lee Whitting. Thanks for listening.